Hello friends, in this video I will be talking about the access modifiers. What is access modifier? Method visibility is defined with the help of access modifier. What is the meaning of this? Suppose we have defined multiple methods, but we want some methods that these methods should not be accessible outside of the class. So that we can define with the help of these access modifiers. We can define the visibility that these methods are visible, these methods can be hidden, and they cannot be accessed outside of the class. So there are three types of access modifiers in Ruby: public, protected, and private. So let me talk about the first, public. Public methods are accessible outside of the class. Suppose we have defined the access modifier public and we can access methods outside of the class. Let me give you an example. Suppose there is a class, that my class, we have defined one method here. Okay, so that is by default public. Let me open this and run it. Okay, we have defined this class and now I can call this method. I am creating an object and calling this method, public method. So I can able to call. So by default this is public. Okay, and we can also define one keyword here, public, and below that everything will be public. Now let me rerun this one as well so that you will understand. And the same thing I can call it again, public method. So I am able to call this method outside of the class. This is the class, and outside that I have created an object and I am calling this method and I am able to execute. I am a public method. So it's a public. And there is one more example here. Suppose I have created a parent class and I have defined one method, and I have created a subclass here, the child, and I have inherited it from parent here like this. Okay, now if I create an object of child class, and on this object I can call this public method of the parent class. So that's the benefit of this. If you define a public method, that can be accessible on the child object. Okay, let me run this and will show you. Okay, I'm creating an object of child here. Okay, on this object I'm calling one method that is defined inside this parent. See, I am able to call. So that's it for this public access modifier. Okay, now I will talk about the protected. So what is protected access file? Protected, if we define a protected, then all of these methods will be hidden, means we cannot access outside of the class. Let me show you. Here I have defined this, my class, and I have defined one keyword here, protected, and below that everything will be protected methods. Whatever method we have defined, it will be protected. Let me define this one. See, I'm creating an object. Now I'm trying to call this method. Okay, see, protected method, some method called on my class, no method error, means it is assuming this method is not defined, means we cannot access. It is trying to access some method that should be public, and it is trying to access the method with some method but that is protected. So that's why it is saying no method error, because it did not find this method. And even in the child class, let me tell you one more example here. Suppose I have created one parent and I have created one method that is protected. Okay, but that protected method can be accessible in the child class. Okay, I will show you with this example that I am calling this method here. Okay, and what is the object for this? Parent. I have created one object here, parent class object, and that is trying to access this method. Okay, so I have created one class, one method that is protected, and this method is being called here in the child, and with the help of parent object I will pass here parent object. So I am first creating a parent object and this object is passing here in this method call. Okay, so this object will try to call this method. So this will be executed. Okay, now I'm creating a child object and calling this method simply as we usual. Let me run this. See, we are able to call this method protected method. Here I have tried this calling of this method in the child class. I am able to call. So what is the meaning of saying this? We can access protected methods in the child classes, right? Let me show you one more example. Here I am trying to call this method on the parent object. Even with the child object, you can call this method as well. Okay. Now I will pass this child object and I am calling this method because this is child and this is parent, and on the object of child we can access this method, but that should be inside, that should be here inside. Let me run this. Okay. Now I am no this time I will only create an object of child, that will not be there. Okay, I'm creating only child object. Okay, and this object I am passing here, this object I am passing here. Firstly I am calling this method, okay, ch.m1. okay, and it is expecting one argument, that is child object. So I am passing this child object as a reference here. Okay, and that child object is trying to call this method, this protected method inside the child. So let me run this. See, we are able to call. So the main the difference here is protected methods cannot be accessed outside of the class, but it can be accessed on the child classes. Okay, here child classes we can access this method, and either it's a parent object or child object, we can access this method. Okay, so that's it for this protected. Okay, so now let me talk about the private method. So how we can define the private method and how we can access those methods. So let me talk about this private methods. Suppose I defined one class here, and with this keyword similar to public and protected, we define this keyword private, and below that everything will be private method. Every method will be private method. Now let me run this. Now I've defined a class with one private method. Now I am trying to access this method. Okay, object dot private method. See, no method error. It is expecting some public method, or it means are you asking for private methods? That is predefined. So we will say private method called on my class. We are trying to access this method, but that is private. So we cannot access this outside of this class. Outside of this class we are trying to access, but we cannot access. So that's a simple way of defining a private method. But there is a way that we can access this method with the help of send method. We can access this method. Just let me show you. On this object I'm running this send method and calling this method name private method. Let me run this. See, I am able to call. I cannot be accessible from outside of the class. I am able to print this one, but with the help of send method we can call this private method. So that's it for private. Okay, now let me talk one important concept. Suppose I have defined one private method, okay, in parent class, but in child classes you can access those methods, these methods, this method here, in this in the child public methods, and in the child private method you can access this method, parent private method. This method of parent class is accessible in the child. See, I am trying to call here, I am trying to call here. Okay, now let me run this method and we will see the output. Now let me run this one. See, first I am trying to run this method, and this is calling internally parent private method. So we are successfully able to call parent private method, right? This is the public method and we could able to access this method. Okay, in the child private method we can also access this method. Let me call this private method of child, right? Now I'm calling this one on the child object. I'm calling this private method. See, first private method, first it is calling parent, that's why it is printing parent private method, and child private method. It is printing this child private. So the concept here is, even we have defined this parent method, we can access this method in the child classes. Okay, but these methods, these private methods cannot be accessible directly in the object of parent. Okay, suppose if I am trying to access this method directly, parent.new.parent method, so we cannot access this directly. These methods are accessible in the child classes but cannot be accessed outside of the class. That's the purpose of this. So this is happening in both protected and private, that we cannot access outside of the class. Then you will tell me that what is the difference between protected and private. That's the main question. So I will talk this about private methods accessible only inside the class without the object reference. Okay, and protected methods are accessible using object reference. Now let me talk on this one. What is this object reference? Suppose I have defined one method here in the parent. Okay, and I am passing one object here and trying to call this method. This is private method. Here I have defined one private method and this method is being called here. Okay, on the object, and object can be passed from outside. Now let me run this one. I have defined this one. Now I am creating one object of this class, right, and passing this object here, and this object is calling this private method, right? Now I'm trying to call, it will not allow me. Private methods called no method error. So we cannot call this method on this object reference, right? But we can call this private method directly. Let me show you. I have defined this one. Now I am trying to call this one. See, we are able to call p method, that it is printing private method. So directly you can access this method in parent class, child class, protected method, private methods, you can access, but on the object reference you cannot call this. But protected methods are accessible using object reference, that we already talked here when we were talking about protected. So we are able to call this is object reference, and we are calling this method protected methods, and with the child object we were trying to access this method. So on the object reference we can able to call this protected methods, but private methods we cannot access like this. Okay, so that is the main difference in protected and private. So what's the purpose of defining private methods? It provides the data abstraction, means we can hiding the internal functionality, that how this class behaves. Okay, we could not access the private methods with the object reference, so we cannot access this in the child as well. Suppose I have defined this parent and defined one method that is private. Okay, Now this method we are trying to call in the child object. So we were not able to call this here. We were not able to call even this method in the same class. So we cannot access this method outside of the class as well with this object reference. So that's the simple one. I think no need to call, but let me run this one. Okay, so I am trying to call this creating object and passing here parent object. Parent object is trying to call this private method of parent class. Okay, let me run this. So no method error. So it's the same concept, but I am trying to call this on parent child relationship. That's it. We were not able to call this one on object, so we can not able to do the same thing on parent child. But now let me talk about one important concept here. I have defined this way, like we have private keyword, we have protected and public keyword to define this these methods. But suppose I have to define one methods that for the Eisen classes, right? So how we can define? So suppose I have defined one class. Now I have defined one Eisen class. Okay, inside that we have defined some methods. Okay, now I want to make this method as private or this method as private. So there is a special keyword here, private class methods. Now I can pass this method name, so this method will become the private. We cannot access. Now let me run this one. I will show you. I have defined this one. Now we can call this my class dot. So this public method we can call, right? But this private method we cannot call. See, this method is private and we cannot access this one. Okay, no method error. So that's it for this video, and thank you for watching.